Predictions for a post-quarantine workplace in Colorado. Denver labor law elected not to report on the employment law changes that took place during the quarantine for several reasons. While there is good reporting on the federal relief legislation like the CARES Act or FMLA amendments for COVID-19, the risk that generalized legal discussion on this blog might lead people to make decisions about their specific situation that might be extremely harmful to their jobs. Now that it appears Colorado will follow national recommendations to ease out of quarantine, we have to wonder what kind of workplace there will be for workers as they return to work. We know that an overwhelming number of workers were laid off as shelter-in-place set in, with even less known about how many will have their jobs restored as people return to work. With the federal enhancement to unemployment benefits beginning to be paid at the end of May, backdated to March 27, it is likely those who temporarily gave up applying for unemployment benefits will make renewed efforts, so the total number of unemployed workers may not be known for some time. We don't know how long it will take for the vast majority of jobs to return in Colorado. Practically, we know that unwinding quarantine will take longer than instituting the COVID-19 quarantine. One obvious reason is that the Colorado orders unwinding quarantine are not opening all industries for work right away or letting offices fully restaff right away. That is going to slow workers getting back to work and slow the return of economic activity justifying full employment. We don't know at this point how many businesses might not return after quarantine ends, or how competition among the stronger survivors might beat up those in more precarious positions. We also do not know if reversing quarantine will be a permanent path forward. If COVID-19 cases start increasing, we likely will see a return to at least a more stringent quarantine. Colorado, along with other states, may enact waves of quarantine to try to flatten the curve. The extent and permanence of the return to normal economic activity will definitely play a role in jobs returning. Industries that rely upon large social gatherings likely will be especially hard hit for some time, which will have ripple effects on other industries. Jobs within these industries and those secondary to social businesses may not fully recover staffing for months or even years after quarantine fully ends. A secondary concern is that after the initial quarantine, the increase in contact and proximity may incite another spike in infections, which will force another quarantine order. Employers could find themselves cutting workers to account for those business losses. More remote work will occur in the future. Businesses remain divided on the subject of remote work in general, but the shelter-in-place order forced many businesses to expand their remote staffing, which may encourage more employers to adopt broader remote staffing policies. As employers see productivity remain fairly consistent with long-term work from home, it will be tempting to transfer more Colorado employees to remote work and give up the expense of maintaining offices. While working from home is widely popular, it also comes with a risk that employers will go a step further and consider moving their workforce out of employee relationships into independent contractor positions. Further issues arise in urban parts of Colorado like Denver, Fort Collins, Boulder and Colorado Springs, in which businesses leave downtown offices and business parks as they downsize office space and in turn reduce the consumers of nearby businesses such as restaurants, gas stations and convenience stores. Employers will likely respond to the return to work with pay and benefit reductions. With the economy still far behind its pre-quarantine state, many businesses are already cutting benefits and salary as they rush employees back into the office. Employees suffer the greatest harm in economic downturns rather than the executives who receive enormous compensation packages for their leadership. Executive compensation is typically one of the last business costs to suffer cuts in a downturn, despite the fact that their leadership failed to plan appropriately or foresee economic downturns. High unemployment numbers will put pressure on workers to accept less pay and worse work conditions. Unemployment numbers reflect that 20% of the workforce was rendered unemployed by the quarantine, an enormous number. That does not even account for the people who suffered reductions in hours or people who left the workforce entirely. High unemployment increases the supply of available workers for any job opening, and employers take advantage of the increased supply by reducing the compensation for jobs. Like other harms suffered by employees following an economic downturn, employees are likely to see many of these changes become long-term. Sexual harassment will rise considerably. Sexual harassment claims are likely to increase over the next year for several reasons. As discussed above, employees are likely to suffer less pleasant workplaces, and employers will feel emboldened to take advantage of employees knowing they are unlikely to leave and therefore suffer in silence. Further, quarantine has understandably been a difficult period of loneliness for a lot of people, and inevitably some people are going to take the return to work as an opportunity to try to remedy that loneliness in some inappropriate ways. Retaliation complaints will skyrocket. With all of the problems discussed above, employees will likely complain about these unwelcome situations only to suffer additional negative consequences, which in turn will prompt more internal and external retaliation complaints. Colorado employers will seek relief from labor and employment lawsuits as COVID-19 stress. Employers are already gearing up to argue a defense of unlawful labor and employment practices that COVID-19 and the quarantine effects resulted in strange times, and employers should enjoy slack in following the law. Waves of layoffs will likely continue for a year or more as seasonal businesses feel the effects. Even with a general return to work, many industries will likely continue to suffer waves of layoffs. Productivity reductions will likely continue for an extended period of time as people remain out of work and people avoid large gatherings. What Colorado workers should do now? This is a tough time for a lot of workers, and unfortunately it is unlikely to get better anytime soon. Workers should aggressively document problems in the workplace and defend themselves as well as they can from unlawful activities. If you believe an employer or potential employer violated your labor and employment rights, then you should talk to a Colorado employment lawyer right away. You may need to act within a short period of time to preserve your claims. You may also want to talk to an employment lawyer about the consequences of taking legal action against an employer versus your other options to avoid an unlawful situation.